Hey, everybody. This is John Sherwood with the Unpolished Church podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. On this podcast, we have the opportunity to talk with Dr. Douglas Jacoby, who is a great friend and mentor of mine that I met 20 years ago in 2005 when he first became a Bible teacher for me. He's lived all over the world and done ministry and taught the scriptures throughout the world and has lived several times both in the States and throughout the UK. And today we get a chance to talk about just his experience, what he's seen, the cultural shifts and fault lines that have happened throughout the world, the way that American Christianity and American culture has been exported throughout the world, some of the dangers and pitfalls therein, as well as some of the ways that the Eastern Church has continued to affect and influence this kind of underground expression, even in the West. And so thank you again for joining us. Please like and subscribe, rate us or review us on your favorite platform. And if you have any questions or something you'd like for us to touch on, please drop it in the comments below. Let's jump in. Doug, thanks so much for joining me here on Unpolished. So glad to have you. It's great to see you again.
It's good to see you, John. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. So we were just chatting a little bit before we started recording this Unpolished thing, and we just said, hey, let's press record and see how it goes. And I was reminiscing, trying to remember when it was that you and I met. And it was in 2005 when I started a biblical studies certificate program with you. I was in Florida and you were teaching out of the Atlanta area. And here we are 20 years later, still dialoguing, still trying to figure out this guy, Jesus, who radically changed our lives and is still gripping our hearts to this day. So yeah, it's just so great to be here with you.
It's great to be with you. And that's really well put. We are still trying to figure it out. We know he's the answer, but we don't have all the answers.
Yes, I remember one thing that you taught me 20 years ago that has stuck with me ever since. And I'm sure it's not verbatim, but it was something to the effect of the more you learn and the more you apply yourself to study, the more you're going to have to get comfortable in ambiguity and not knowing. And man, has that proven to bear. So thank you for those nuggets all those years ago.
Well, life is that way anyway. There's ambiguity. The harsh blacks and whites of youth sometimes become gray, but certainly in academics and in Bible study, we would like it all to be just spelt out and formulaic.
Yes.
Maybe there'd be no need to trust God. There'd be no need for faith. We're that way.
Exactly right. And I think that's something that I've really connected with that thought is how much more faith that requires from me as I press into greater and greater ambiguity, uncertainty, mystery, right? I'm always reminded of David's words in the Psalms of just, mysteries that are too lofty for me to attain. And just what a great thought that is as we kick off an unpolished conversation about small church expressions. So obviously, you've been traveling the world for decades now, teaching and speaking about Jesus and the scriptures, and have had a myriad of experiences and all kinds of church expressions and modalities and pathways. And we just wanted to get a chance to talk a little bit with you today about what have you seen, as you have traveled the world over the past 30, 40, 50 years, talking to people about Jesus and experiencing Jesus in community in all kinds of ways. Tell me, what are some of the things that you've seen? What are some of the patterns? What are some of the shifts? What are some of the consistencies or incongruities that you've seen over this course of time as culture shifts, as obviously the Western culture especially has shifted so much in the last 50 to 75 years? Just talk a little bit about what rises to the surface for you as you look back over that time.
So many things. I mean, even in the East, I think of the underground churches, which I'm involved with. The West is coming to them. In some ways, their faith is purer because it's purified by the threat of imprisonment or worse. On the other hand, I don't think we should think that Western culture and philosophy and all those things, the materialism, the worship of technology, the agnosticism, I think that's going to come to the East. It's going to come to the developing world, to the global South, South America, Africa. So that's a prediction. But of course, in parts of the world where it's not easy to be a Christian because of the government or the culture, and that's about 80 countries out of the 195, people are much more likely to be meeting in small groups And so, I mean, I've spoken to big groups of thousands, even 10,000, but I've spoken to churches of just 5 or 10 also. And that's a trend, I think, even in the United States, a move towards small church. I was really
Why
excited.
is that, do you think? What do
Oh,
you think
why?
are some of the catalysts behind that, or what
Oh,
is it
wow.
that's precipitating that, you think?
Well, disaffection, disillusion with big church and the politics and all those things.
Yeah.
But also,
Celebrity pastor fallout, probably.
that doesn't help either. The abuse cover up. But small church works. I mean, even if you're in a big church, if you're not part of a smaller group or section, you can't be close to everybody. You won't really experience Christianity as it's meant to be experienced. So it works. I was in Texas at Abilene Christian University earlier this year, and I was thrilled to meet with the doyen of small church or house church, and that's Kent Smith. I was so eager to be with him because I know that when we leave Europe and probably move to the United States for the final time, we'll definitely be exploring the smaller church scenario.
Yeah.
But it's a huge trend, and I don't think anyone knows how many people are involved in it. People say, "Well, the churches are bleeding members." Well, yeah, a lot of people are walking away. It doesn't mean they're giving up, though. A lot of them, I think, are ending up in they're just off the chart. People don't know where they are, but I think you've experienced that too, haven't you, John?
Yeah, like you said, there's a Western exportation, right, of many things, culture prominent of them, and church is kind of, I think, absorbed into that cultural exportation. But there also seems to be an importation of things that are far more common in the East here, where there is kind of, I think, a growing underground movement in the Christian heritage, where I think because of all of these factors, the politics, the cozying up to the political structures of the world, the the celebrity pastor fallouts, the disillusionment, I think, is creating not so much sometimes, but not always, just a giving up of the faith in Jesus, but rather a move towards an underground, untrackable, off the charts, off the grid type of expression. And that's something that we're kind of experiencing here in our local context.
Right. It's not that people are necessarily stingy. I mean, if you leave big church, then presumably you're not having to pay for buildings and staff and all that money. You're probably spending more on helping the poor. So I don't think people are leaving big churches because they're stingy, but sometimes it is because there's a financial angle. They just don't feel good about where their money's been going. They say, I don't think it's being spent well. I'm a steward of what God has given me. And
I'm going to go out on a limb here and share a personal story about what you just said. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but I've shared it privately for many, many years. I became a Jesus follower in 2001, and as a young college student in my early 20s, and you and I met in 2005. My first ever Christian conference, I was coming from more of like an agnostic, sort of very Christian light kind of background. I had never really been to like Christian camp or Christian conference of any kind. The first Christian conference I went to was like a traditional mega church type of experience. It was thousands and thousands of people convening at a huge convention center in the States. And I remember walking into the first like lesson in this huge auditorium that would sit, 5,000-10,000 people. And I remember there being huge screens like all throughout the auditorium so that the stage could be projected, because you couldn't see the stage. That's how far away it was. And I remember, as just a few months old, walking in the Lord, I walked in and my stomach sank. And I just thought, there was this dissonance. I didn't even know the Bible that well, but just a very cursory reading of Jesus' teachings, there was this dissonance created in what I was experiencing as I recognized all of the energy and money and resources that went into producing this thing. And I'm not, of course, saying that that's an inherently evil thing. But for me as a Jesus follower, it did create a dissonance early on that actually stayed with me and became more and more prominent over the years to the point where I finally decided I personally cannot participate in these. And I don't feel great about leading others to participate in these things where we are spending millions upon millions of dollars for a very, very brief window of time and experience. I don't know. I've really wrestled with that in terms of the allocation of Christians' resources and how much of it can, at times it can feel so self-serving, right? And maybe not even effectively self-serving at that. And so I'm trying to be careful about how I communicate that. Because again, this is the first time I'm doing so publicly, but that has been a challenge for me to really feel a clear conscience around that kind of expense from a community of Christians. And so I don't know. But I will say, to kind of try to round this out and present another side of the coin, I was a part of a college ministry conference at one point that I think really tried to kind of hold this intention. And so there were thousands of college students from all over the country. And we actually were in New Orleans after the hurricane there. And we spent a good portion of the conference actually going and putting our hands and feet to work and helping to clean up and of course, the efforts and energies and resources to mobilize a few thousand college students is not easy either. But I thought I feel much better about those energies and efforts and resources and money because it's outward. It's in view of my neighbor, right, et cetera. So I don't want to paint with like an overly stigmatized brush here. I am trying to balance what I'm saying, but I've wrestled with that. And I don't know if maybe you have any comments on that or just thoughts about what I'm saying or what you've seen in your experience.
Yeah, and I'm certainly, through my ministry, through my teaching, I think you're the same. I don't want to destabilize people's faith, cast aspersions on motives. Oh, okay, there are some crooked people who are probably doing quite well in the religious world making money, but most men and women, they're good-hearted. It's just what they've received. It's their culture. I like big church as long as the sound isn't too loud. Just blast out my eardrums. I like big church occasionally. So I don't know. In my perfect world, it would probably be mainly small, but once a month or once a quarter. To come together with 500 or 5,000 other people would be pretty exciting.
Sure.
Especially if we felt good about it, like we're really learning, or we're really making connections, or we're really making a difference in our world.
Right. Yeah. And just to reiterate too, kind of a tagline here for us at Unpolished, like we've really tried to be very explicit about, we are not promoting small church modality as the only or the correct way or expression of church, but that all expressions and modalities of Christians gathering, God uses for his glory and uses them in a diversity of ways to impact the world and to create his new kingdom creation here on earth. And so maybe I can ask another question, Doug. So as you have spent time, in ministry all over the world, especially in the States and in various places in Europe, like as if you were going to say to a young person, let's say in their 20s or 30s, following Jesus, and you wanted to look back upon your life and experience and your travels, and you wanted to offer them some advice, you wanted to offer them some direction, some things to watch out for, pitfalls perhaps that maybe you've experienced, like what would you say to that person in their 20s or 30s wanting to follow Jesus, wanting to be a whole and healthy disciple, and thinking about how to bring about Jesus' kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? What kind of things come to your mind? What surfaces for you if you were going to have a conversation with that person?
Well, as you were speaking, 4 things came to my mind. I'm not sure the order is.
Of course, 4 things came to your mind. That's awesome, Doug. Everyone else is like, it would have taken me 10 minutes to come up with one thing. All right, spit them at us. Come on.
Okay. So one of those things is, in church, you will be hurt. Not heard. Hopefully you'll be heard too, but you
hopefully that too. Yeah. But you absolutely will be hurt.
But to think
and that goes for any expression, right? For any expression of church, that's going to be true.
Right. Like, and the family you grew up in is a place where you may have been hurt more than anywhere else. I mean, it's just what humans do. So be careful about knee-jerk reactions, judging people's motives. It's one thing to say, I didn't find this pleasant, or I didn't agree with that that lesson that was taught in the Bible. It's another thing to say that's coming from a wicked person. That's coming from someone who only wants to kill and destroy. He's the thief. He's not the good shepherd.
Mm.
Judging motives, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4, God will do that. He'll reveal everything in time.
That's
But
right.
Paul says, I don't even judge my own motives.
Mm.
Another thought that came to my mind is, unless you have the luxury, I mean, it's wonderful if you can just stay in one city your whole life, but you'll probably be moving from one city to another. And you'll compare churches where you were and where you're going. And there's some good things about the place you left. And there's some good things about where you're going, but don't idealize it. There's some problems where you're moving, and there are problems where you were before. So there are different strengths and weaknesses, and get that. And ultimately, the last thought I had was that the Bible is the authority, regardless of how the church's traditions are presented or programs are supported. You've got to follow what you think the Lord is saying in the scripture. This is not a subjective thing. It's not just, I feel this. We need to really put the time in to take a good hard look at Jesus's life, his words, the impact, and look at the entire Bible. And so if you think you're at a church that has no tradition, that's probably one of the traditions. Yeah, we tell people we're not a denomination. We have no traditions. That itself is extremely unlikely to be true.
Yes. So I know here in our local context, we've been spending some time really focusing in on classic formation practices. And we've been in this time of practicing prayer for the last many months. And one of the things that we've been doing that I think has been new for me and many others is the practice of listening prayer and learning how to listen to and discern the voice of the Good Shepherd, as you mentioned there from John 10. And one of the things that's so critical about hearing the voice of God, however that comes in audible ways or still small voices or senses and feelings and intuitions, that voice has to be tested, right? It has to be vetted. And the primary way classically that the voice of God has been tested is through community and through the scriptures.
Right.
And so I think that that's so important for you, that or what you're saying, and something I've been pondering of like, it would be really difficult and almost impossible for me to vet what I think I'm hearing Jesus say to me if I don't know the scriptures. And what a premium there is there to be able to saturate myself, my mind, my heart, and be in a community that's saturated with the scriptures, so that when we do hear the voice of Jesus, we can have some way to make sure it's not just, us making things up in our own minds and hearts, etc. And yet there's this tension too of that, but Jesus also speaks outside of his scripture that is congruent with scripture. It's not in conflict, but let's face it, right? The scriptures don't touch on every decision or every aspect or every angle of my life, but Jesus is present in his spirit, right? And so maybe you could talk about that as it relates to especially church expressions, right? Modality of communities of Christians. What is the role of the Spirit, right? How have you seen maybe the good and the bad and the ugly, the role of the Spirit in the life of an individual Christian and community of Christians? And what advice might you offer that same 20 or 30-year-old?
Wow, too many things are coming into my mind right now. You used the word several times in the last couple of minutes, the word community. And that's the best way to study the Bible. And that's the best way to do theology. If it's just one person, his thoughts, her impressions, his wild idea. I've discovered something no one has seen since the death of the apostles. I've discovered it. Maybe you did. Not that likely. I don't think you're the only one. But being in a community, and particularly being connected with others who love the Lord and love his word, that's really big. The role of the Spirit, the Spirit can be, it's a promise. It's the Father and the Son living in us. That's what John 14 says. It's the Father and Son make their home in us through the Spirit. So we all have the Spirit. So there's some dangers. And one is to look down on someone who says he has the Spirit and think he's acting spiritual, and you think he's being too zealous or over the top. And it's like when Paul said, when the undisputed gift of prophecy was alive and well, he said, don't despise the prophecies. don't, someone may not be very smooth, or maybe things aren't put the right way, but don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Spirit is moving. On the other hand, don't be naive. I mean, right now I'm studying First John, and First John warns us about the spirits, the different false prophecies out there. So we need to be not naive. We need to be wise like the serpent, shrewd, but still maintain the innocence as of the dove. And to hear the Spirit, I guess the last thought I have right now is we've got to make time. We've got to slow down noise in our schedule, even acoustic noise. Although some people can concentrate even in a noisy place, most people find quiet is really good. But to hear God, even to hear yourself, like, what is it I'm trying to do here? What do I actually think? We got to just slow down. And modern life is crazier and crazier and lonelier, particularly with the advent of everything that's connected with the mobile phone.
That's right. For something that touts greater connectivity, it's ironic how isolating it can make us and help us to be.
Yeah, and you've seen all these studies about young people they have online relationships, but many of them are just very lonely and depressed.
That's right.
Is getting and that's
have you read the book, the Anxious Generation, that recently came out this past year?
I haven't read that one. You're recommending it?
Yeah, it's a recent book that is a deep research study on the mental health effects of technology with young people. It's called The Anxious Generation. And there's all these really direct and clearly researched correlations now with the internet, technology, screens, and its correlation to mental health illness, in particular anxiety and depression in young people in particular, though it is widespread, but young people, show the greatest. At it
right now. Yeah, I've read studies in the psychological magazines about that correlation. I see it's written by Jonathan Haidt.
Yes, Haidt.
I've read other work by him. He's very astute. So
yes,
thanks for
that. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because we just had a micro church gathering on Sunday. And this particular Sunday, we call it a cluster. And so we actually had a couple of micro churches meeting together, which doesn't happen, but on some frequency. And, I'm not leading it. I'm not the preacher. I'm not preaching a message. It's, we actually call them 1 Corinthians 14 style services. It's very organic. There's not necessarily a ton of programming, and there's not a schedule. And so this thing went for a solid 2 hours, and the kids were a part of it. We had young kids, 2-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And it was so stark to me because I have been in a context for so long, being a paid vocational minister, preacher, evangelist, pastor, whatever you want to call it, where I have been trying to program services and keep to time. And for anybody that has done the vocational ministry, you know how hard it is to program a service and stay to time. Like that's the golden calf, man. If you can get out on time. And it's so funny because on this past Sunday, I realized like this is going way longer than typically we would gather or that people would be used to if they walk into a church, but no one cared. It was as if no one had considered how long this was going because there was so much engagement, so many tears being shed. It was so moving. And yet, like to your point of just, we have to create space and slow down enough for that to happen. If I was trying to rush on to the next thing or make sure that we were done by such and such a time, all of that would have been missed. And so
what you're describing just sounds so healthy, Jon. I mean,
I have enjoyed it.
until the arrival of big church, and I think most of us assume that happened when the persecution stopped and the government made its alliance with the church, or should I say the church made its alliance with the government in the early 300s. Until that time, church tended to be smaller, and it was certainly home-based. That was the norm. And
that's right.
There's nothing in the Bible about keeping to time. Now, you know me, Jon, I'm someone who really does like to stick to the time. because I think it shows respect. But there's
That's
a
right.
obsessive, almost neurotic side of that too, which actually
Yeah.
is a problem with a lot of Northern Europeans. They're
Mm.
like, punctuality itself becomes an end, almost a little
Yes.
cruel.
Me and my wife have had a more than a few arguments over the course of our marriage about this idea. One of us tends to be a little loose, and the other one tends to be a little
That's
not so
common in
loose.
so many marriages, where they're
Yeah.
different. But
Yeah. So, as you are considering, or as you are, sort of stepping out of your European home base ministry for the last several years and looking towards moving back to the States here in the future, what are some things that you're hopeful for in terms of your church expression, your experience of Christian community? What are some things that maybe you are, a little concerned about or trepidatious about, or things that you're kind of wanting to watch out for? How are you processing
well,
moving from one culture to another in terms of Christian community?
there are many things we're concerned about. The move from British culture back to American is something we've done. This is my third time living in Britain, so we've had many international moves to other countries. So we're moving back. America may not be quite the same as it was when we left this time, which was in 2020. I don't think we feel a lot of intrepidation, but I think the churches have changed a lot because we left in, it was early COVID time. So we want to have a healthy connection with big church, if you want to call it that. But we realize that probably the most important things we'll do will be at the smaller level. And so Vicky and I have a lot of ideas how we want to use our new home hospitably, but not just to have meetings in, but a place where we can invite people to come and stay. They need a break, or if they're recovering from an operation, or maybe a divorce, or maybe they just lost their job. Come and stay with us a few days or maybe a few months. To have the space to do that, we need to move a little bit further out than where we lived before, not quite in the center. But we're actually very excited about that. And I don't know what shape that'll come in, but I'm a huge networker, and I imagine the networker relationships will remain. We know so many people, and my wife's the one who wanted to come back to the U.S. and come back to Atlanta because she knows so many people there. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're going to go to Georgia for relationship. But how that will be expressed in the church, whether it's micro, mini, cluster, or I don't even know how you define all these things. But we'll be definitely experimenting, and we're praying a lot about that. And we will not have made the decisions even once we've landed back in America.
Sure.
We want to make sure we don't just jump ahead with our ideas, but we're going to give it time.
Yeah, I think
enough of an answer to. I mean, that was a good question you asked.
Yeah. No, it helps. It draws my mind actually to one of the practices that we're getting ready to start leaning into as a microchurch community here is the practice of generosity. And it came to my mind as you were sharing about wanting to be hospitable, thinking about as you move, as you acquire a home, to think in ways that are generous, and how can what we have be a blessing to others. And I just think that's so of Jesus and his kingdom. And I'm thinking back to that question of what would you tell this young person, and so I think it's all kind of swirling around and kind of funneling into that vein of just the spirit of generosity in Jesus, that is so counter to most of the messaging and the narratives of the world, especially in the West, that we get, that what is mine, and I want to enact power, whether it be politically or otherwise, to help ensure that what I have is mine and grows, and whether that's building walls between me and neighbor or whatever, or whether it's securing my 401k, and all these ways, narratives, messages, worldly attempts to not be generous.
Yeah, but
there's
go ahead. About young people, this is tricky because I meet by young people, I mean teens, 20s. I'm usually thinking, and they say, "Yeah, I want to make a difference in the world. I really want to help the poor." And I'm saying, well, don't drop out of college. Get a good job. Get a job where you make enough that you can really make a difference. Now, of course, some jobs will consume your soul, or if you're so committed to the work, you don't have time for relationships. That's very unhealthy. But if we encourage total independent spontaneity, just float around and be nice to people, you're probably not going to end up with someone who has any financial security or any way to really help people in the long term. But the narrative of the world is that, your value is your net worth. It's not your value as a human in God's image. It's your net worth. And careerism could destroy you too. But for many younger people, I would say, focus and if you have the privilege to go to university, do well, get a good job, make money. Don't spend all of it. Live at a little bit of a lower standard of living than you could with the salary you have. Save and share.
That's right. I'm reminded of Paul's words where he said that we should work hard with our hands, that we have something to share with others, not just work hard with our hands so that we can enjoy.
Yeah, he says your goal should be to live a quiet life. I don't think he means a non-evangelistic, introverted, inward-focused life, but not noisy, boisterous, rude, inconsiderate, quiet in a different kind of way, right?
That's right. That's right. So as we get ready to kind of land this plane, what is on your mind as you think about the cultural shifts and the cultural dividing lines and sort of fault lines that have been occurring for some time now in the West, as it relates to the Christian community, right? As it relates to Christians gathering? Obviously, there has been a growing swell in the West, in the States, towards Christian nationalism, towards trying to politicize and indoctrinate policy through a Christian-y kind of lens, and how that's become so divisive.
Are you leading me right now? Because you asked me what I thought, and then you talk about Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I'm trying to frame my question. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure you understand what it is I'm asking. Like as you look at these various cultural shifts, what comes to your mind, and what comments do you have as it relates to Christian community?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I think most Christians have bought into the narrative of the world and the kingdoms of the world, and they don't understand what the kingdom of God is. What I preached on this Sunday was Revelation 11:15. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ. The famous words from Handel's Messiah, not just from Revelation. Okay, so you live in the U.S. A lot of people would think it would be a massive change for me to go from being a Republican to a Democrat, or from a Democrat to a Libertarian, or an independent to a political person. Or no, the big change wouldn't be going from Democrat to Republican, because they actually agree on most things. And it's not about God. It's about self and this personal security and national security and a certain lifestyle and standard. The big change would be to go from that to a totally apolitical position, where you actually believe the only government I'm really respecting is God's government, and I will be a good citizen, as Romans and First Peter tell me to be. But I'm not going to get sucked into the maelstrom, the vortex. And what's happening right now is very, very disappointing to us as we look at how so many Christians have they're saying, well, if it just helps me financially, then I'll support this guy or this party. And it's not about character. It's not about Christ. Really has nothing to do with it. So that, I think, is very concerning. I think it's very dirty, if I can use that word. Yeah, that's an unpolished word.
Yeah,
it's a smoother way to say it. But we're not planning to jump into the fray. But we do know that the temperatures are much higher than they were when we left 5 years ago. But yeah, that's a concern. And what's amazing to me here, even here in Britain, a lot of people they're not so concerned about what's happening in the States. They think, oh, this is good. Thinking, really? In fact, this will blow your mind. I was talking with a Chinese guy last month, and he was saying, "Oh, America's so fortunate to have it's the president it has right now." And I was surprised he even had an opinion, but that really took me aback.
Why? What was his point, or what is it in that you're sensing, and even in Britain, about why this is good?
Yeah, I'm not.
What is the unwritten statement there,
Oh, I didn't say that this is good, or did I say
or
this?
that they're saying that it's good?
Yeah, I didn't pursue it with the fellow in China because I sensed, as you probably sense sometimes, oh, this is going to be tense. I'm not sure this is going to go in a right place. Sometimes we just need to let things go. But I will
Right.
say, in the evangelical world, a lot of people in Britain are aligned with the evangelical churches in North America, and with the conservatism and the, for whatever strengths and weaknesses the political parties therewith associated may have, it's reflected here, and that caught me off guard too. Talking to evangelical friends in the UK, realizing, wow, a lot of them, they they are simply following in the steps of many churchgoers in the U.S.
So it's
So,
like what I was saying earlier, that exportation,
yeah,
experience and dynamic.
yes, yeah, issues get exported from one, and I mean, with globalism, the whole world's connected now. Better for worse, it's connected, and um, yeah, I think that what that really means is still dawning on me and hitting me from time to time when I find myself really shocked. And I'm not someone who doesn't think about these things, and I do visit quite a few countries every year, but the world it's changing fast, and for Christians, there's a real danger here that
How
we would.
can we how can we be a part of exporting something that is perhaps a bit more true to that kingdom, that Jesus kingdom mentality, where Jesus is king and no other king? What would it look like for us in that power brokerage of exporting to the rest of the world?
I
How
don't
can
know.
we do that?
I don't know. I mean, whatever influence we have to encourage people to, for example, read the Gospels. I had a consult last week. Yeah, just about a week ago, with some leaders in the city where they are is in a country that's at war, and their leaders there say, well, Matthew 5 says we're not supposed to kill our enemy; we're supposed to bless him. But other people in our country and other cities see no problem with killing the enemy. How should we relate to them? What should we do? And I said, well, there are two separate issues here. One is what the gospel actually says. What did Jesus teach? On that, I think it's pretty clear. But the other issue is, how do you relate to people who don't have the same view? And you got to keep those things separate. I mean, there needs to be respect and discussion, but you cannot make people change their mind. And even if you have the scriptures, you say, well, look, the scripture says this. That doesn't mean people's thinking will change. Maybe it will in a year or 2 or 10 years. Maybe you plant a seed, but you cannot force people any more than you can force people to become Christian just by showing them, your 10 favorite verses in the New Testament.
Right. Or holding them at the sword's edge, as has been so often in the church's history. We can't force the lordship of Jesus upon people. Even Jesus himself doesn't force that, right? It's an invitation.
Yes, that's really remarkable. So I think the more we look at Jesus's life and ministry, and then use that as the yardstick, use that to shed light on current practices, the more we're going to step back and think, whoa, we've not arrived. We're not there. In fact, there are a lot of things we're just doing that are just wrong.
So certainly continuing to keep a strong eye towards Jesus and the scriptures, the gospel, his life and ministry. Perhaps another practical is just to share this podcast with somebody. If you're listening and you know a friend that this may benefit or help, please feel free to share this with them, like and subscribe. Doug, it's been so great having you here. I look forward to being able to talk again, and may God continue to bless you and your work for his kingdom.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you and the work you and your wife are doing very much.
Thank you. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much.